happy May Day. And what are some things on this May 1st that you want to memorialize? What do you take inspiration from? And what struggles are especially important to you?
Sorry, I jacked on.
Cheers.
Well, my wife, Valeria, who's Brazilian, just reminded me a few minutes ago that 5 years ago, she was in Brazil visiting. I was here. I was giving a talk at Harvard on May Day, and she wrote me a letter saying, don't forget it's May Day, International Workers' Day. And of course, nobody in the United States knew that. Everywhere else, like in Brazil, of course, they knew it. Everywhere else in the world, they knew it. I remember, for example, a visit to Spain, Madrid, a couple of years after Franco's fall. And I had to make a decision which of many May Day demonstrations to take part in. There were two huge demonstrations from the CNT, the Anarchist Labor Union, many others as well. So which of the two anarchist labor movements demonstrations was I going to take part in? If you were in the United States in that same year, I think it was 1985, you would have known that it's Law Day. Reagan had instituted Law Day so that people could get together to support the attack on Nicaragua. Well, it's changed a little bit. This May Day, today, there are a lot of people in the United States, mostly young people, who actually know what a May Day is. A day of an international day of support for the struggles of American workers. Here, it's been wiped out. What people know about is something called Labor Day in early September, when you celebrate the fact that you're going back to work after a summer's vacation. That's a triumph of propaganda in a free country that is pretty spectacular. Think about it. A day in support for the struggles of American workers, unknown in maybe the freest country in the world. Instead, celebrate the day when you go back to work. It's changing. Today in the United States, there are significant actions taking place. A strike by some of the most oppressed workers in the country, in Amazon, which the workplace is indescribably horrible. Meat packing plants, others, where the workers, if you look at them, are Mexicans, Afro-Americans, Guatemalans, Salvadorans. They're striking, okay? Now, they're being supported by others. There has been the labor movement was almost completely crushed under first Reagan and Clinton and his successors. It's the weakest it's been since the 1920s, when there had been a vibrant, lively labor movement in the United States, but it was crushed by force, mainly the liberals. Woodrow Wilson's Red Scare had wiped out the last remnants of it. 1920s is essentially gone. One of the great books of labor history, David Montgomery's, is called The Fall of the Labor Movement, referring to the 1920s. It revived in the 1930s. Took some time. It revived, became very powerful, spearheaded the way to the New Deal. It went on to move towards all sorts of achievements. After the war, the counter-reaction by the business classes who were very class-conscious. Counter-reaction began, continued. They finally got their champion, Reagan. His first act was to smash labor unions, bringing in scabs to break up strikes. Illegal in every country in the world, practically outside of apartheid, South Africa. But he opened the door for it. Corporations walked through the door. They started bringing in scabs to break up strikes, Caterpillar and others. Clinton came along with NAFTA, which offered employers the opportunity to break strikes by putting up signs saying transfer operation to Mexico and flooding the workplace with propaganda saying, you try to organize, we're moving to Mexico. It happens to be illegal, but it doesn't matter if you carry out crimes if you have a criminal government. So if the government doesn't enforce the laws, do whatever you like. And so illegal actions by corporate businesses, which grew enormously under Reagan, continued beyond under Clinton. And finally, you get to the point where we are now. The labor movement is very weak, but reviving in interesting ways. Partly what I described about today, but also a couple of years earlier. The revival actually began with teacher strikes in some of the most reactionary places in the country where labor unions had gone. The teachers were striking not just for higher wages, which of course they deserved and was a good pay, but for educational opportunities for children. They were converging on state legislatures saying, pay enough for classrooms for kids, so, facilities so the children can learn. That spread like wildfire. Labor joined in. There's been some major strikes, like GM and others picking up. There could be what took place in the 1930s. It took a long time for the Depression hit in 1929. It was 5 years before the strikewaves began. The strikewaves, when they began, I mean, I have childhood memories of this. This is my early childhood. My family were all involved. First generation immigrants who good, working class, all involved in this. This is all around the strike wave, once it began, had a number of very significant effects. One thing is it overcame the deep racist antagonisms within the country when blacks and whites started to organizing together in CIO strikes. The racism was gone. That had happened before. You go back to the 1890s when the labor movement was really developing. There was tremendous racism, not just blacks, but what were called Huns, anybody from Eastern Europe, Italians, Irish were treated like dogs. As soon as the labor movement began, gone. They're working together for a common cause. The other thing that happened, which is of great significance, is that by the mid-30s, 1935, the workers were starting to carry out sit-down strikes. Now, suppose you're sitting in the management office and you see a sit-down strike. You know something. In 5 minutes, those guys sitting there are going to say, we don't need you. Get lost. We're going to take over the enterprise and run it ourselves. We don't need a bunch of guys telling us how to turn a screw on an assembly line. You can work it out better than you can. You're done. The whole system of control is very fragile. It relies on consent of the subordinates. And it's sort of built into them by decades of intense propaganda. So you're taught to believe that having a job is the most wonderful thing in the world. What's having a job? Having a job means selling yourself for almost your entire waking life to a totalitarian leader who goes beyond anything that Stalin ever thought of. Stalin didn't tell you, you can have a bathroom break now for 5 minutes, or you can talk to a friend for 30 seconds. Here's the clothes you have to wear. So you're turning yourself into virtually a slave for most of your waking life. And that's your highest ideal in life. It wasn't always like that. You go back to the 19th century, when early industrial revolution, working people were bitterly opposed to the industrial system, which was taking away their liberty, their dignity, their freedom, was turning them into virtual slaves of absentee owners. They wanted to destroy this system. The slogan of the major labor movement, Knights of Labor, was those who work in the mills should own them and run them. You don't need you guys. It took a long time to beat that out of people's heads. Actually, they were picking up on a tradition of 2,000 years. Go back to classical Greece and Rome and all the way through. The worst attack on human dignity and rights was to make a person dependent on someone else. It's considered virtual slavery, different from slavery only in that it was temporary. But that was a slogan of the Republican Party under Lincoln. Lincoln himself, who was a classical liberal, picked up the 2,000-year tradition that regarded what was commonly called wage slavery as essentially slavery. Have to get rid of it. Well, as I say, it took a long time to beat that out of people's heads. I don't think it's far below the surface. I think it's